So many people think of their gardens as a real sanctuary in their busy lives, but it's hardly going to be very relaxing if Jill's looking out of her bedroom window at you while you're having your cup of coffee on a Sunday morning in your dressing gown. So what can you do? Well, in this short video I'm going to give you my top 5 tips on how you can reclaim that sanctuary and bring privacy to your garden. So unlike a lot of elements within the garden, when it comes to design, I tend to think about privacy without my clients even mentioning it. After all, if I'm going to put a patio or a seating area into your garden and it's overlooked by the neighbours, or perhaps there's a footpath that's running past it where people can look in, it's really up to me to think about that and to try and offer you some sort of solution. And the way we need to approach this first is really as a garden designer, before we even put pen to paper on the drawing board. It's right at the initial stages when we're doing that site survey and site analysis. Do take a look at the video, link above, on site surveys and analysis if you need any help with it at this stage. And it's at this point during the survey that I'm going to be thinking a little bit about what's going on in and around the garden, as well as what's actually happening in the garden itself. Also going to be considering very carefully where the garden might be overlooked, and this is this element of privacy here that's going to come in at this early stage. If there's a bedroom window next door, that's looking into a certain part of the garden, I'm going to make sure that's down. If somebody can see through maybe the fence or a certain part of the hedge because there's a footpath or something similar to that, again, that's got to go down there. So when I get back to the drawing board, I can make sure I've covered that. Now in this survey, as you can see, I annotated my plan of the garden with various comments on both sides, highlighted the neighbour's view. You can see that the neighbour to this side had no view into the garden thanks to a large hedge, and the fact that it was a bungalow also helped. There were no upstairs windows. However, on this side of the garden, the neighbouring house had an upstairs window that looked down into the garden. Now, from here, I was able to roughly assess their line of sight and establish later on how this would affect where certain elements of the garden would go. And this is point number 1. When assessing the garden, it's what areas of the garden are overlooked. Never mind trying to regain privacy. First of all, are the parts of the garden that are more private than others? And making sure that this is noted down right at the very early stages while we're coming up with our concept. For example, when looking at this survey, let's say the client wanted a hot tub. There are certain areas within this garden where I can add one, and there's certain areas where I probably don't want to have one. So round here by the kitchen, tucked out of the way, we could quite easily have a hot tub that would be well out of view. Behind the garden room, I know that's probably not the ideal position for it, but the garden room would block the view to it. Or indeed here, right next to the wall, as it would shield them from view while they're in the tub. And that's a really simple way to start off, is thinking about this sort of idea of, can we put seating areas or areas where we're going to be living that aren't in direct view. But what if you are so overlooked that you can't help this? Or maybe the areas that aren't overlooked are also those that are in deep shade, and you really want your seating area, quite understandably, in a sunny spot. You simply might not have those out of view areas that you can put things. So what do? Well, we need to create some. And this is point number 2. The most obvious one, really, when it comes to these sort of gardens, and a lot of clients often sort of start by suggesting this sort of thing, is by adding trees and plants that are going to block the view. Now, this is great if you've got a good sized garden and you can afford to be able to put multiple trees in different lines so that it gradually builds up and blocks that direct view, and then maybe soften it with additional planting that's going to create layers of planting. That's going to look great, perfect. But not every garden's big enough to do that. After all, if you want a tree that's going to be of significant size, let's say 4 or 5 meters high, you're probably also going to have a canopy that's going to be close to 4 meters wide. And that overhanging into a garden that might only be 6 meters wide in the first place isn't really appropriate. After all, you're going to be solving one problem and creating probably 2 or 3. You're going to have birds that are going to be dropping their mess all over your nice new patio. Maybe branches or twigs might come down, or leaves on that barbecue in the summer. There's also going to be a potential of overhead shade that might actually then create problems in the wintertime, especially with your patio going green from algae. Now here at Creative Roots, we design a lot of gardens that have perhaps limited room, and one of the fallback options that we have, especially when it comes to creating privacy from a boundary, is the use of pleach trees. Now if you haven't come across pleach trees before, they've been around for centuries in lots of formal gardens, and the easiest way to think about them is it's a hedge up in the air with the tree stem, usually reaching up maybe 1.5, 1.8 meters meters before the canopy starts. The young shoots and branches are trained around now we use bamboo canes, back then probably would have been timber. This is a great option as it does everything that you need it to, in that multiple trees put together can almost create a solid screen along a boundary, whilst also not taking up too much room coming into the garden. You also don't have those little branches and leaves constantly falling onto that lovely new patio of yours. They can look really good as a design feature as well, especially if you've got quite a modern or contemporary wall or fence that you're going to see through the tree trunks through to, or potentially underplanted with lots of nice bright or bushy planting. This can look really good when uplit as well, using garden lighting, and they can look really good when you plant them in like an avenue setting as well. So there's lots of great options, and certainly a great way of bringing some privacy back to your garden. Next, number 3, we've got trellises and screens. So we've looked at living screens through the use of pleached trees and planting. Now, perhaps going for a more ornamental type screen. Now here in the UK, fences can't be more than 2 meters high without applying for planning permission. So obviously a 2 meter high fence is only going to give you so much privacy, especially if your seating area is further down the garden and as I say, there's a neighbour looking down from their bedroom window, which is probably 3-4 meters high up in the air. So what do we do? Well, these screens can look particularly good. We can create them into features, and we might move them quite close to the seating area. So rather than being on the boundary, they may indeed be a lot closer, or you might have a series of screens that might step in and out of the garden, and have a seating area either directly behind one of these or just slightly behind that. Could be a hedge as well. You know, it's the same sort of concept as by creating a bit of a screen, a feature wall that are cutting into the garden. It doesn't obviously want to be a particularly utilitarian structure, so we're probably not talking close board fences or brick walls here, but something that's going to create interest. Perhaps, for instance, it could be a porcelain clad wall with a beautiful plant in front of it, so that the wall creates that foil but also doubles up as this additional privacy. So as you can see from the simplified drawing, if I try and block the neighbour's view at the boundary, which is quite close to them, I need to go really high up into the air. You can see their view is going to be at sort of 4 meters up in the air looking down. Yet if I put the screen or whatever it is that I'm putting in maybe 2 meters away from the seating area, then clearly I'm a lot closer, and so their eye line is going to fall straight onto this screen, and that's the basics of it really. Now there's loads of different companies that offer these type screens. Some are in laser cut aluminium or steel, and certainly timber is still an option. Here at Creative Roots we do a lot of linear timber screens ourselves. They're relatively simple to produce and can be quite cost effective, depends on the material you use. Often softwood is a good option, but if you can afford it, cedar or perhaps hardwood can create a really lovely lattice screen that's going to work really well. Still probably see through it when it's finished, but the idea isn't necessarily to totally block everything out, but just so that if somebody glances down from their window and you glance up, you're not going to have that eye contact, or they're not going to sort of really be sort of seeing you there, as I say, in your dressing gown on a Sunday morning. So it's really just about disturbing that direct line of sight down to wherever you are. Now option number 4, this is very similar. Moving on from the screen, is we're now talking pergolas. Now the beauty of a pergola is not only can we put slatted or any type of screen on any of the sides or what have you. A lot of the aluminium type have pull down sides as well, but actually we have a roof to that potentially that we can use. If for instance you have quite a small garden and your neighbour that's looking down on you at such an angle that perhaps a 2 meter high screen isn't going to work for you, by having this slatted top or a screen top on a pergola, that's going to do the job for you perfectly. Again, some of the ones that you buy off the shelf, the aluminium types, they have these slatted aluminium type roofs which you can open and close, which work really well. More cost effective option, or not if you go for hardwoods, but potentially a softer option is to use a timber pergola. You could have timber slats. I guess there is a slight issue there that some people don't necessarily want to have a totally closed off roof, and so wires going across and then climbers growing on these can look really, really lovely. Obviously you get those sort of Mediterranean vibes. Another option that we've been seeing quite a lot over the last decade really have been the introduction of these shade sails, which I think originate from Australia. The concept of having a frame of a pergola where you could put these sort of eyes in each corner, and then string up a sail which can then go up when it's in the heat of the summer, not just for shade but also again for privacy, and be taken down again perhaps when it's a slightly duller day and you want a bit more light in the area, or over the winter period where really it's all about looking out into the garden. Now, if you don't have a budget for this, or you really don't want a pergola, the other option is you could get a really good parasol. Seeing more and more parasols out in the shops every year that are quite significant in size, rather than just these sort of circular 2-meter jobs that they used to be. But certainly that over a table can work really well. And finally, number 5, we're thinking potentially about sinking areas into the garden. Now bear with me here, because it depends on your garden clearly, but if you have lots of undulations, if there's a slope on the garden for instance, you might be able to cut in and create a sunken seating area that's actually going to almost create a natural screen in itself. If you don't and your garden's relatively flat, well, you can still create a sunken area, perhaps potentially not going so deep, and then creating planting around that, so that actually that planting doesn't have to be so high to create that screening, as it were, from whatever's overlooking you. Yeah, do make sure, obviously, that you do some tests within your garden, dig some holes to make sure that where the water table is, clearly you don't want that sunken seating area they've just built filled up with water. We're going to be talking about water features in the future. You don't want to create one unnecessarily, but do subscribe if you're interested in water features, because that's coming very soon. This tends to be a concept that's much easier when you have a sloping garden, or, as I say, a garden that undulates. You could create that undulation. You could dig out a nice deep sort of hole and use the earth that you've taken out from that to sculpt the land around it. A bit more of a project, that one, but certainly an option for those creatives out there. And then we go. We've got 5 steps to your whistle-stop tour to creating privacy within the garden. So we've looked at designing the garden with that overlooking eyeline in mind. We've talked about pleached trees. We've talked about screening. We've looked at pergolas, and then sinking the garden, or sinking areas of the garden, to create that privacy. Hope you found that useful. Was a lot shorter this time, but hopefully that gave you lots to think about. If it did, don't forget to give us a thumbs up, a bit of a like, and keep those comments coming, and any suggestions for videos in the future are greatly appreciated. Until next time though, I hope you managed to get out in the garden this week. See you all very soon. Thanks for watching.